The COVID-19 pandemic has certainly changed a lot about our world and how our society functions, at least for the time being. And back at the beginning of the pandemic, several outlets ran optimistic stories about how those changes might be good for the environment. But today, I'd like us to examine the environmental costs of the pandemic. There are several main issues I've been able to find with how our behaviors are changing because of the pandemic, and how those changes might be hurtful to the environment. I'm sure this is not an exhaustive list of the issues present, but here is a sampling of the things I think are most obvious and most problematic. People aren't traveling as much, so fewer people are flying or driving, which is probably good, but when people do have to go somewhere, they're much less likely to take public transportation, even if that used to be their typical mode of travel, and will substitute driving instead. This means that even though there have been some reports that carbon emissions may have decreased over the past year, these ideas are a lot less cut and dry than we might like. The second environmental problem I see is one you may already be familiar with, as it was in the news a bit back at the beginning of the pandemic. This issue is food waste. I've linked a New York Times article down below that tells the stories of the food waste problem pretty well, but here are some highlights. The pandemic caused quarantines, and the quarantines had ripple effects on the food supply chain, leaving many food products, from vegetables to milk, stuck at the farms that produce them. These ripple effects hit a bunch of different areas of our society. Processing plants and transportation companies were low on employees due to quarantine or illness, meaning food products couldn't make it to stores. Restaurants and schools closed during quarantine, meaning there was less demand for fresh food products. And people's eating habits changed once they were eating at home more, so there was less demand for fresh vegetables. At the time the issue of food waste was in the news, I was heartbroken that the fresh food being wasted couldn't be sent to food pantries instead, especially considering the rise in the number of people who are food insecure during the pandemic. But food pantries are often unable to receive, store, and distribute fresh food products as easily as they can non-perishable items, so the farmers were left with no other option than to dump or discard their produce. And, as I've mentioned before, food waste isn't just an issue of the food items being discarded. This also means that literal tons of synthetic pesticides and fertilizers were applied to cropland that produced food that nobody ate. These things create carbon emissions and pollute the environment in a variety of ways, not to mention all of the money the farmers wasted growing food they were unable to sell. But while the two issues I've already mentioned were bad, I think the single biggest environmental problem caused by the COVID-19 pandemic can be summed up in one word: plastic. I tried to be a responsible consumer, so I never went to the grocery store without my cloth bags. But since the start of the pandemic, my grocery store has refused to allow cloth bags inside the store, citing an overabundance of caution because they don't want anything that could possibly have germs from my house coming into the store. So instead, I have to use all of these. Here's another example. Normally, if I wanted tea or hot cocoa from my local coffee place, I would bring in my travel thermos and have them fill it up instead of getting a plastic or cardboard cup. But reusable cups have gone the way of my cloth grocery bags. Anything that could have germs on it has to be left at home. You have no other choice but to get your coffee or tea in a cup that is guaranteed to wind up in the garbage. And I'm sure you're already acutely aware of how much plastic is used in food delivery. With all of us staying at home and not being able to go to restaurants, many people are ordering takeout and delivery, but every delivery order includes the plastic containers to hold the food, plastic utensils, and probably a plastic bag to hold everything in the order. I've linked another article down below that starts to scratch the surface of this plastic problem, describing how there's even more plastic in the ocean and other parts of the environment this year due to changes in our behaviors and consumption because of the pandemic. And there's a new plastic player in the game: disposable masks. Like flimsy plastic grocery bags, disposable masks chronically show up where they don't belong, either because they were disposed of improperly, or outright littered, or they blow out of trash cans and trucks before making it to a landfill. Disposable masks are problematic for the environment, not just because they're plastic, but also because there are many documented cases of them becoming tangled around wildlife. But I want to make something very, very clear. I am not against any of the precautions being taken to protect people from infection with COVID-19. This pandemic is incredibly serious, and we need to do everything possible to protect everyone. I also want to say that this plastic problem isn't our fault as individuals. Even though it breaks my heart to not be able to use my cloth grocery bags or my reusable travel thermos, I understand why I can't do those things right now. It just sucks that the only alternatives are plastic. Why is the only option for so many products plastic? This is a society-level problem. It's not something we can solve as individuals, and it's a problem that will continue to exist long after the pandemic is eventually over. How do we fix a society-level problem like the prevalence of plastic? You're probably tired of hearing this recently, but the answer is voting, and also becoming more involved in politics through things like lobbying. Rules and regulations that change what companies are allowed to produce will help us lessen our reliance on plastic. It'll never go away completely, but it's definitely something we could be doing better at. So if you can, consider stepping up to advocate for changes to our system that will reduce the prevalence of plastic and benefit our environment. What do you think of the environmental issues I've described here? Have you thought of any that I didn't mention? How do you think your behaviors have changed because of the pandemic? I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments. If you liked this video, don't forget to like it. If you didn't like this video, please share it with someone who would. And if you'd like to support the Roving Naturalist, remember to hit the subscribe button and the bell notification icon. Then go check out my Patreon page. You can also follow me on Twitter and Instagram. I hope you are all staying healthy and safe. And as always, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.